Welcome. Thank you all so much. I think by way of introduction, my name is Lean DeBrucker. I'm with Gaia, together with my colleague Sheila Davis. We work on the battery waste program at Gaia, and Catherine from Ecology Center reached out to us about the concern of the Envergia battery recycling facility permit that was entered and then pulled. And there's a risk that a legitimate fear that it could come again. And so the goal of this call is to share a bit what Gaia's been learning about the risks of these types of battery recycling facilities. But then really the heart of the exchange is Paul Connett and his wife Ellen to share about their experience with a community in Broome in upstate New York fighting a battery recycling facility that had been proposed there. And we have more folks entering the room here. So that, Catherine, maybe because when I start to share my slides, it's going to be a little trickier for me to make sure that I'm letting people in. So I'll make you co-host if that's okay. I've done that. And
That's
Sheila,
fine. Mhm.
do you want to say hello, Sheila?
Hello, Sheila Davis with Gaia, and I'm the US Canada lead for the battery waste program.
Could you say for those who don't know what Gaia is?
Oh,
Just
great.
yeah,
Uh,
thanks.
Gaia is a global alliance for incinerator alternatives, a global organization that has fought against and continues to fight against incinerators. We have members throughout the world, of course, in 92 different locations, and who are successfully fighting incinerators, but also looking at zero waste solutions for their communities. And of course, Paul and Ellen are former or current Gaia members who have been, I guess Paul is the founder, right, Paul, of
I was
Gaia?
there, yes, I was there in 2000 in South Africa.
Yeah, yeah.
Great moment, great moment.
And so yeah, so we have a battery program that basically looks at what we can do with battery waste, how we can prevent it from going to incinerators, and of course, apply the zero waste hierarchy to try to prevent waste from occurring in the battery life cycle from the beginning. So, uh, turn it back over to Lean.
Great. Thank you so much. So I'll speak for just about 5 minutes with some basics. I'll share my slides with you all afterwards. So if I skip some, don't worry, you'll get the link and you'll be able to read them at your own pace. And if you have questions as I go along or as Paul goes along, please write them in the chat. Or if it's urgent, raise your hand, right? And we can make this more of a dialogue. We can see how the speed and the interest in your questions come along. So here, can you all see my screen? Is that working for you? Great.
Yeah.
To get started, so like I said, I'll just do a quick 5 minutes and then Paul will do the heart of the presentation for you. Sheila may have some more to add about her experience supporting communities in Reno, Nevada, who were impacted by the largest known operating lithium-ion battery recycling facility in the US, Redwood Materials. And Q&A is definitely at the end, but during as well, if that makes sense for you all. So this is what little, right, we've been able to glean from the news. The 115,000 square foot facility in Northwest Detroit. The description of what is the facility going to do, it says it's going to, I've underlined this in red, it's going to make black mass, right? And then there is this lovely wording that the permitting process will be expedited by the city supporting the state. So in order to understand the risks of the recycling, we have to know a little bit more what's in the batteries. And while, of course, much of the world today is talking about the critical minerals of lithium and graphite and manganese and cobalt and nickel. There is also, in fact, a major rush to produce the toxic fluoropolymers that are used throughout the battery. This is what's used in the electrolyte solution. It's what's used in the binders. It's what's used in the separator. Today, 40% of a particular subset of PFAS, PVDF, 40% of what's manufactured globally today is used in electric vehicle lithium-ion batteries. And that's going to double by 2028. The number of fluorinated additives that are in the battery structure to improve energy density and to improve the flame retardant nature of the batteries is exceptionally high. And they keep coming up with more types of fluorinated additives that are new and that aren't even regulated really in most places because they're so new. And then of course, carcinogenic materials. So what's in the process itself? There are many different pathways. This is evolving, this is dynamic. I'm not going to go into each of them. I think the goal is really to say that producing black mass is one small step in a broader, at least three-pronged process. And important for us also as an anti-incineration organization, you see the black mass in that little ball in the center here. That black mass can be treated by smelting or by acid leaching. But really, how is black mass made, right? So we saw Envergia is going to produce black mass. So what is the facility going to do? From our understanding of reading and researching what we have come to understand about these different types of processes, the batteries that come in, the lithium ion batteries that are come in, they are first discharged, typically by immersing in a salt brine solution. Then they are dismantled and shredded, and then comes the tricky part that you see some exclamation points here. It is a combination of processes using toxic solvents. And then you see we have an and or in the graphic because it's unclear, right? The precise proprietary processes that are used. Some companies say they're using ultrasonic waves. For sure, they're all using some form of mechanical crushing and sieving. But then there's the thermal. And the thermal treatments, what we're seeing is it seems to be, they're experimenting, right? To see these are maturing technologies. The key takeaways for the solvents, one of them that seems to be the most effective is highly toxic. It's called NMP, N-methylpyrrolidone. It's spelled out on the next slide. That one is, yeah, is very toxic, and it's used by almost every company as far as we can tell. And then in the thermal treatment, from what we're seeing in the studies that are created, and I'm sure Paul will go into this more, the PFAS, there is an incomplete breakdown of PFAS at these particular lower temperature ranges of 400 to 700 Celsius. So black mass is a term that frankly, actually, it really depends on which batteries came in and which process they did. So even if you see the word black mass, we don't actually know what's in it, right? There's no standard definition. And whether it's classified as hazardous waste or not depends on what goes in and what they've used to process it. So I'll just recap some of the big concerns: fire and safety hazards. Here, we've put on here, I put a picture of a fire. There've been fires in Detroit at EV plants. There are fires at battery storage facilities. This is due to thermal runaway. These are terribly difficult to put out. The toxicity from these types of fires is also awful, with flammable and acutely toxic gases, heavy metals, and PFAS release. This is a picture of the Moss Landing fire battery storage facility in California. This one happened in January of 2025. The next big impact is air pollutant emissions. We do not have comprehensive studies, right, of all of the air pollutant emissions, but we're highlighting for you here. There are nickel, manganese, cobalt oxide particles. These are dust particles containing heavy metals these are particles that are released during manufacturing and during recycling. There are toxic and carcinogenic compounds that were documented at a Sung Il. Sung Il is a Korean recycling company. At a Sung Il facility in Hungary, and that was due to that release of that solvent NMP. That is a solvent that can be released in the form of particles in the air or as a solid that's then released in sludge and wastewater. And then there's also the air impact of incomplete breakdown of PFAS caused by those thermal treatment processes. The EPA has determined that NMP, this nasty solvent, poses an unreasonable risk to workers, but it has not actually set limits on the inhalation exposure. The state of California, however, has set limits. And so those, I think, is the state of California has set a limit of 1 part per million, limit over 8 hours on the air that workers breathe. I'll go a little faster, I'll skip this one. Water. Again, there's a very high water usage for washing, separation, leaching. The release of that nasty solvent NMP in sludge and wastewater documented in at Sung Il's facility in Poland, not in Hungary. And then NMP, there have also been spills here, documented chemical spills at an EV plant in Altium, Ohio, a spill of NMP. And then other release of heavy metals and toxic chemicals in wastewater and exposure to even more solvents. I'll skip this one, but the EPA does have some toxic release inventories. How useful they are for our particular situation remains to be determined, but there is some data available. Same thing, the EPA is on the one hand monitoring for lithium and PFAS, but then, given, of course, the Trump administration is rolling back and delaying the implementation of PFAS limits in drinking water. I'll skip this one for now. Maybe, yes, I will pause here and this is just a last slide of course, looking at the manufacturer responsibility laws, if there is one at the state on battery EPR, the importance of benefit sharing, and then waste trade, because much of the black mass that's produced in the US, if it's low value, chances are it's going to be exported, and most black mass is processed in China and Korea. There is an attempt for domestic energy security to keep black mass in the US, but unfortunately that really also depends on the market price of the black mass's value and of the ability of the US producers, the US recyclers, to be able to process that economically. And there's a lot of challenges with the scaling up of technologies that might work on a trial basis, right, on a research basis, but getting them to be economically feasible at scale remains a challenge. So I will, pause there. I think, the rest of it is just, questions. We have a list of all these questions of this about siting, emergency preparedness, about the facility owner, about the process, about worker grievances. I will share these with you. We've tried to come up with just a comprehensive checklist for you all that you can then, consult, and we're happy to continue, supporting you on that. But I'd love to, turn it over now to Paul. Or Sheila, you could share a bit about Redwood Materials. You could fill in.
Sure. So I've been working with groups in Nevada. They have a federal designation of what they're calling a tech hub that basically encompasses all of Nevada. And they have designated it as a lithium loop. which means that they have almost all the operations of the supply chain located in Nevada. So they have the mining, they have the Tesla Gigafactory for battery manufacturing, and they recycling redwood materials as well as for disposal. And then they have several material manufacturers. And so it's an opportunity to, of course, look at the entire life cycle, but really we're honing in on on redwood materials. And they're the biggest, one of the biggest, I guess they are the biggest battery recycling in the nation right now. They receive 70% of all lithium battery material, and they are an offshoot of Tesla. And so we've learned that basically they're not very transparent. The most information that we were able to glean from them has been through the US EPA environmental assessment document or report. And they describe, and because they applied for a major loan, otherwise we really wouldn't have got much information from them. There's not a lot of information about the recycling processes otherwise, the chemical use, and if you look at the toxic release inventory, which is another public reporting system that you can get information from, they really only report on the nickel and the um, cobalt in terms of being hazardous materials. But of course, as Lean mentioned, they do use a lot of PFAS throughout the manufacturing process. And of course, it's in the product at end of life. And I think Paul will probably be able to give you a lot more granular information on that. But of course, now the federal government, through the TRI, they're supposed to report on some of the PFAS, um, but they are under the threshold of reporting for the most part. So even though the government requires them to report, they will not generate possibly enough PFAS to report, or they're not even uh, screening it or trying to figure out what type of PFAS emissions or discharge that they have. Additionally, they use a lot of water, and they're not transparent about the water that they're using because they're located in an industrial park or a huge industrial park. And so the water is recycled through the industrial park, and therefore they don't have to report on how much water they use. They've asked for confidentiality in their air emissions, and it was granted by the Nevada Bureau of Air uh, division, however they named themselves. And so they don't fully report on their air and they weren't emissions, and they don't report on the air. They didn't provide the state initially with some of the air data, emissions data that they would have preferred. We have been working with the UAW, who's trying to organize in the facility, and of course they're very anti-union, along with Tesla, so it's been very challenging. But there's also been a lot of exposures uh, in the facility and complaints from the workers, and so they're looking. UAW is looking to uh, start a campaign organizing with the community as well as with the workers in that facility. So the overall story is that uh, uh, because they are such a big company and because they are a branch of Tesla and have a lot of money, they have
Yeah.
been able to
About lithium ion battery recycling. Okay.
Pam,
So
I'm gonna, okay.
Okay. I'm just rattling on here. I don't mean to, like, if anybody has any questions about redwood material, the exposures, type of process, I'd be happy to answer it. But Lean, how's it going with PowerPoint?
No, I think that was great, Sheila. You covered some good ground. So I think, Paul, we're ready for you. And this is occupying all of my screen, so I'm challenged in responding to chat. So Catherine and Sheila, I'm going to rely on you to help me out hosting. Thanks so much, Paul. Over to you. And your microphone is muted, Paul, if you want to unmute yourself. You just tell me when you want to go to the next slide, and I'll do my best to keep up with you.
Paul, you're muted.
Muted.
Um, I'm only seeing what I earned, what we learned fighting. I don't see anything else.
Marcia, I think you're on Paul Connett's screen. If you go to the top, if you look at the top, there are a couple of tabs. There's a separate tab.
Oh,
Yep.
good. Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah. Yeah, don't worry about here. See if you can deal with that.
Oh, okay. Yes, take that away. Can you've all got it on your screen now?
Yes.
Yes.
Looks good.
All right. Well, first, a few words. This is a complicated subject. And quite frankly, we had to learn on our feet. Ellen and I have for years been fighting incinerators, as you probably know, since at least 1985. And certainly we brought some of that experience to this issue, as well as organizing in communities. But there were issues with this lithium-ion battery recycling, which we were unfamiliar with. And that's what we had to learn on our feet. So next slide, please. So this has been written up. GAIA has written this up, and I think they've also made a videotape about our victory. Community in New York wins against lithium-ion battery burning facility. Next slide. And there's a picture of one of our demonstrations in Endicott. Let me give you the geography. Endicott is part of a tri-town area. It's Binghamton, Endicott, and Johnson City. And the Endicott has a long history of pollution, first by a shoe factory called Johnson Shoe Factory, and then IBM. IBM poured a lot of solvents into the ground, which eventually ended up in people's basements. And a lot of people got cancer from this trichloroethylene or perchlor, whatever. The area has had a lot of cancer and documented by the state and by universities. There's no question that this area has a higher cancer rate than other areas nearby. So it's an unconscionable sighting that we're looking at here. But it was very clear from the beginning that the fix was in. Mario Cuomo, the governor then, had put a $1.8 million grant to support this company. Binghamton University, a stone's throw away, has a Nobel Prize winner who helped to develop the lithium-ion battery. And you had this IBM complex, huge complex, where IBM left this like a ghost town. And they've been wanting to use those buildings for a long time. So they put this all together. They thought they'd have this giant lithium-ion complex where they'd make batteries, they would recycle batteries, and they'd have the experts online, and it would create jobs, and it would be, live happily ever after. But the most important thing is, with Mario Cuomo's clout, with that $1.8 million grant, it put the local officials, the mayor, the deputy mayor, and another Democratic councillor. Clearly, they knew what the governor wanted, and they knew where the future was. So we had the mayor, the deputy mayor, and another councillor with a built-in vote. Every time we had a vote, it was 3-3. We could never break this triad, or whatever you call it. Okay, so I was one of the members of the No Burn Broome science team. So was Ellen. Next. I'm a retired professor of chemistry. I think you know all this. Go on, next. Next. between 1985 and 2000, we helped to defeat over 300 incinerator proposals in North America. That's what we brought to the table for our battle in Endicott. Next. And obviously, I'm not against recycling. I've been promoting recycling since 1985, but I am against using incineration or gasification, any high temperature application to these batteries for reasons which will become highly apparent as we move on. Next. As far as the Endicott proposal was concerned, the location of this project was unconscionable. It's too close to housing. Next, it's too close to the recreational areas, as you'll see in the photographs in a moment. Next, the topography is awful. You're surrounded by mountains, and the pollutants are trapped. There's a high rain, so a lot of the pollutants are brought down into people's gardens very close to the facility. And as already mentioned, there's already a high cancer incidence in the area, and some of the pollutants are known to be carcinogenic. This, believe it or not, that red square is the proposed building, an existing building which is going to be used to house this project. Just across the road, you see the houses just across the road. And in the directly north, you see a baseball field. A home run would land on the fence of this facility. Next. And here's a shot. There's my wife holding the No Burn Broome sign. And there's the baseball field with the facility just behind it. Next. And a matter of honor, we try to persuade Sun Jil that they shouldn't be doing. A very sinister aspect of this is the community was expected to have all the risks, but the benefits all went to Korea. This black powder, which Liam was talking about, that was all going to be shipped back to Korea. The community would get no benefit other than a handful of probably very dirty, dangerous jobs. Next. The dynamics, the plant would operate for 12 hours a day, processing 1 ton of batteries per hour, i.e. 12 tons of batteries per day. That's the quantity of material that had to be stored. You have to store those materials. You can't expect them to be delivered on the day. So you have a large storage facility. And also notice, with 12 hours a day operating, you get 1 startup and 1 shutdown every day. And that is where most of the dioxins are produced. Next. Is it an incinerator or a recycling plant? Next. According to us, No Burn Broome, this was an incinerator. According to the Sungjil, the name of the company, this was a recycling plant. Both sides were correct because the object of the exercise was to recover valuable metals and reuse them, recycle them, yes. But the process, next, the process involves incineration. And that will become next, that should become, okay. So the process involved a combination of heating in a rotary kiln and burning afterburner. So in the rotary kiln, the essentially some of the plastics and the low boiling point, melting point substances were melted and vaporized, and then you had an afterburner to burn those gases that were liberated. And that's where the incineration comes in, the afterburner. But the rotary kiln, raising the temperature of these batteries up to, 600 degrees Celsius, that also produces the toxic emissions, which I should talk about. Next. Okay, this is what it looks like. It's a rotary kiln, 4 feet in diameter and 80 feet long. So we're not talking about a small thing. And the dismantled batteries are fed into one end of this rotary kiln, and the battery metal carcasses fall out the other end. And all the nasties, which are vaporized, end up going through the afterburner where they are burnt. They're literally burnt at that point. And then it goes through various stages: heat recovery, heat exchanger, fabric filter, a pump, and a wet scrubber. So that's the system. Now, how much material is recovered if this is recycling? Well, the metals recovered is about 10 to 20% of the batteries by weight. Next, the metals wasted then, the ones which are gasified and burnt and never recovered, that's about 80 or 90%. So that right from the get-go, this is a really phony recycling exercise. And the materials incinerated include plastics, binders, electrolytes, and that's where you got some very nasty toxics. Next. Now, elements cannot be destroyed in combustion. Elements that go into a combustion process must come out of that process. And one of the elements which should definitely be there is chlorine in the form of PVC plastic. And when you burn anything which contains carbon and chlorine, you're going to get dioxins and furans and PCBs, at least 1,000 different substances, many of which include some of the most toxic substances we've ever made in a chemical laboratory. Now, this is where I'm going to shorten because I don't have as much time as I'd like, but Liam was generous enough to give me more. As far as the dioxins and furans are concerned, what am I going to say here? Oh, the company that wanted to build this was Sunjeel, claimed to have had a sister plant in Seoul, Korea. And they've been operating this for 9 years at the time that I'm talking about. And yet they only offered one single data point for dioxins in 9 years. And this is what's incredible. The New York Department of Environmental Conservation, that I'm not friendly with, used this single data point to estimate the annual emission rate and concluded that that was safe and gave a permit without requiring a full environmental impact statement. And at that point, for me, it was clear that the political fix was in. Andrew Cuomo wanted this facility, and the New York State Environmental Conservation was not going to get in his way. So they didn't worry about not having any data on dioxins. Another thing which was disturbing is they didn't worry about nanoparticles. Now, there are no regulations and no monitoring of nanoparticles, these very tiny particles which are less than 1 micron in diameter. We know they are produced in incinerators in large quantities. But the DEC wasn't worried about it. When we brought this discussion up, what about, oh, there's no regulation for them. And if there's no regulation for the crudest regulatory authorities, then there's no problem. You can't measure it, therefore it's no problem. It could be a hell of a problem, but because they can't measure it, it's no problem. Next. And this is what Sunjeel said about the nanoparticle issue. Mr. Mervs, an official, says, the nanoparticles are just water vapor. This is outrageous PR spin. In reality, the nanoparticles produced in combustion are very toxic and of great concern. The reason is the smaller the particle, the greater the surface area. The greater the surface area, the greater the enrichment of the toxic. So you imagine there are these toxic metal atoms and dioxins and furans in the flue gas. They are going to deposit. And they're going to deposit at the largest surface area that they can find, and that's going to be the tiniest particles, the nanoparticles. Next, these nanoparticles are not efficiently captured by air pollution control. Next, they can travel long distances. They remain suspended for long periods of time, and they can penetrate deep into our lungs. Very serious. It's not that they're not nanoparticles from other sources like diesel trucks and so on, but there are no other nanoparticles that enrich so many toxics. Basically, you enrich the toxics of all the toxic material that you have in the waste stream, and when you burn that waste stream, you release the toxics, they then deposit on these nanoparticles. You don't capture them very well. They get out into the environment, they get into our lungs, and they're so tiny they go through the lung membrane directly into your bloodstream. Next, they're then distributed throughout the body, and when they reach the other tissues in the body, again, the same, nothing, there's no defense. The body has no defense for these very tiny particles. Next. Here you see a particle in brain tissue, and that particle contains lead, barium, chromium, and iron and silicon. And you don't want that in your children's brain. Next, during this whole time period, a very important paper was published in McGill University in Montreal. They showed next that there was an increase in brain cancer as a function of the number of nanoparticles that they measured in the air. The more nanoparticles you found in a given sample of air, the higher the brain cancer rate was in that area. And this is a devastating paper, and everybody should be aware of this particular paper. Next. We asked, no, the important thing here is it was clear that this Canadian researcher, Wiesenthal, had a way of monitoring nanoparticles in urban air. Now, hitherto, the regulatory agency says, oh, it's too complicated to measure nanoparticles in the emissions of incinerators. But why do it then? If you can measure it in urban air, why not, we suggested to the DEC, why don't you measure the nanoparticles downtown Endicott before the incinerator is built, and then measure the nanoparticles at regular intervals in urban air after that? No, the DEC was not interested in this. Well, very early on, when I gave this presentation to the other members of the group and the science team, we were very, very lucky to have John Ruspantini on our team. And John was a senior environmental remediation project manager for a company that's been doing remedial cleanup all over New York State. And what John told us, he says, you talk about dioxins. I tell you what, if you find a PFOS or PFAS or whatever in the emissions, that will make them jump. Dioxins won't make them jump, but POFAs will make them jump. And sure enough, and this is what John told us about PFAs. They're a group of man-made chemicals containing very stable carbon-fluorine bonds. They have been used worldwide since the 1940s. These chemicals can be found in many food packaging, non-stick frying pans, etc. These chemicals are designed to resist degradation. They do not burn easily and are very persistent in the environment and the human body. They have been dubbed the forever chemicals. There is evidence that exposure to PFAs can lead to adverse human health effects in animals. These chemicals can cause reproductive, developmental, liver and kidney and immunological effects. They've also been linked to tumors and cancers and low birth rates. I don't think we're bothered with that. Okay. Now, John did it. John found that there are some PFAs in some of these batteries, not all of the batteries, but in some of the batteries. And just finding one PFA in one lithium battery made the DEC jump. Next. Oh, this is the one they found. You can see it's a very simple molecule. It has carbon with 3 Fs on it on both sides of the molecule. That is one of the solvents. One of the electrolytes. One of the electrolytes. Okay. Don't need to worry about the details. But go back one, please. On March the 20th, 2020, the DEC issued a letter to Sunjil and says which reopened the Title V hazardous air permit. They took back the permit and said, you've got to come up with a system which will enable you to know which batteries contain PFOs and which don't, which would require complicated sorting out system, etc. So this really slowed things down, was probably our biggest break. But sorry, next one. Now, we were thinking, well, this was just one little electrolyte in one of the companies, but that's not enough to really clobber this thing. And then we found out from the EPA there are thousands of these POFAs and PFOs, thousands of them. Most of them are small molecules, and those are the ones that have dominated the media. But they also include what I call the elephant in the room. There are polymers which are PFAs and PFOs. And the two big ones, next, the two big ones are fluoropolymers are next, the polyvinylidene difluoride next, which is the binder, is the binder in the cathodes. I've got another diagram in a moment. This binder binds the metal oxides in the cathode to the container, the outer lining, the aluminium liner. I'll give you a diagram of that in a moment. Next. Okay, so the two polymers I've mentioned, the one you're familiar with, I'm sure, is Teflon. And that is a very simple molecule. It's just big. CF2 is a carbon joined to two fluorines for thousands of times. It's a polymer. The bead is CF2. The necklace is CF2N. Hundreds of these things in a line. Every carbon is joined to two fluorines and the next CF2. Now compare that to polyvinylidene difluoride. This has a carbon with two hydrogens joined to a carbon to two fluorines. That's our bead, and the necklace is PVDF. Okay, next. Oh, there's a nice picture of Teflon. Now, back a moment. So I'm sure by now most people know that if you overheat a non-stick frying pan in your kitchen and you have a parrot or parakeet in the kitchen, you'll kill the bird. When you overheat Teflon, it breaks down into the hydrogen fluoride, which is extremely toxic, and smaller carbon fluorine compounds, which are also toxic. And so that's the model. And we found that the DEC was very fussy about not allowing companies to burn Teflon. So I said to them, well, what about PVDF? Oh, we don't know anything about that. Even though they're sister compounds. Now to the nitty gritty. This is a very schematic diagram. This is the cathode, okay? It's surrounded by aluminium foil, and inside is graphite and metal oxide particles. Metal oxides, manganese, cobalt, nickel, and a couple of others. And this is the valuable stuff. This is what people want. They want those metal oxide particles. But the challenge is, how do you separate them from that PVDF binder, the glue? And that PVDF binder is about 3% by weight of the cathode. So we're talking about quite a large quantity of material here. Next. And this Chemical and Engineering News, this article here gives you a breakdown of the composition of a lithium-ion battery, which I found very useful. Next. Very little is known about what products you get when you try to burn PFAs. Remember, PFAs were designed not to burn. They are very, very stable, and the idea is that they could be used in high temperature applications and you wouldn't break them down. But what you have in fires and in incinerators and in gas kilns, you are breaking them down. But we don't know enough about what they're broken down to. But they will be broken down into smaller PFAs, which are going to be very toxic. Next. And we've had some experience of trying to burn PFAs in Cohoes, New York. Very unsuccessful, a lot of contamination for the environment, and it's really burnt the fingers of the DEC as far as using incineration to destroy these substances. Next. It's not throughout this, you'll be told these are not incinerators. These are something else. They're super duper green things, but they're not incinerators. Phooey. The heating part of the process breaks down the molecules into toxic byproducts, and the afterburner attempts to burn these products. In both places, you're going to produce some very toxic byproducts. Next. Okay, they did not require a full environmental impact statement. This was just absolutely shocking. Next. Oh, the catastrophic fire risk. Leanne mentioned this is one of the dangers. And one of the other members of our team next was how, there are a lot of questions which are not answered by Sanjil. I'm looking at my watch. I'm going to suggest, Leon, that I will send, well, you got the PowerPoint, so you can distribute that to everybody on this call and others who are interested, okay? And you'll see all the questions that Sanjil did not answer, even though they supposedly are operating a plant for 9 years in Korea. Next. So next. I mean, these were simple questions. What is the nearest housing to the incinerator? Because we were pretty certain that the facility in South Korea was in an industrial park. It wasn't right next to housing. Next. 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 Now, I did find a paper this afternoon, which could be of interest to people that want to do more research on this. This was published in January of this year, and it talks about the contamination from lithium-ion battery fires, and they've measured quite a number of perfluorinated substances, PAFS, in the soot. So there's no question when you burn lithium-ion batteries, you produce PFAs, which are then go into the environment on nanoparticles or gases and so on, and go into your local residents, lungs and brains. Next. Now, Howard Warner is a dentist. I spent the last 30-odd years fighting dentists, but not this one. Howard Warner, not only is a dentist, but also a member of our science team. He had a strong biochemical background and also knew something about dioxins. Next. And he was particularly concerned about the fire risks. And the photographs, I think, is going to tell you everything. Next. 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 Okay. This is the battery storage facility. According to Howard, this is the materials used for this would not resist an explosion. And so everything would go everywhere. And you'll notice it's right next to an energy generating facility, a transformer, a NYSERG substation, right next door to it. Okay, and here in this picture, you can see the facility. You see the blue line that leads from the proposed incinerator to the storage facility. So you need at least 12 tons of lithium-ion batteries are going to be moving from that facility, the storage facility, to the burner each day. The problem of accidents explosions, fire risks, and so on. And now look at the rest. You know, the public were told that this facility was going to be built in the IBM industrial complex. Well, you can see the IBM, it's on the very edge of the IBM industrial complex. You see the railway line there, and across there you see Price Chopper, and you see oodles of homes. And coming back to the foreground, you see the homes up Clark Avenue, and the baseball field, I think, is not quite in the picture. So if there was a fire, there would be no time to evacuate people from the local area. And if the kids were playing baseball, to get them out of harm's way would be very, very, very tough. So that was what Harold was interested in. Now, another member of our team was Ellen, you've already heard from, who has followed this issue of incineration very closely. She was the editor of Waste Not from 85 to 2000. And she looked at the issue of alternative methods of recycling lithium-ion batteries. Next. So remember, this is what you're trying to do. You've got to separate the PVDF binder from the metal oxides and the graphite. Here are some of the ways of doing that. Next. You can dissolve the aluminium foil and the metal compounds using aqueous acids or alkalis, mild acids. More about a specific example of that in a moment. That's our preferred method. Dissolving the PVDF binder using an organic solvent. Those solvents are extremely expensive and possibly toxic, and they may be the one that Liam was talking about. Vacuum pyrolysis, where you heat and suck off the PVD binder, is evaporated and collected. And a cryogenic method. Now, cryogenic method, which I like the sound of. Cryogenic means going very cold, not going very hot, going very cold. You take your batteries and put them into liquid nitrogen. And the beauty of this is your plastics will become like china, incredibly fragile. And if you put the lot through a mill, a grinder mill, the plastics will just come out as a powder. The PVDF will come out as a powder, whereas the metals will come out as a solid. That may be the most elegant way of doing this. It may be a little more expensive, I don't know. But Ellen found something incredible. She found this delightful experiment was done by students at Singapore University and was published in Environmental Science and Technology. And what these students did was incredible. They did the non-toxic dismantling of these batteries and coming up with the black powder, but not using any high temperatures. And then to the black powder, they subjected it to waste, orange peel waste. Would you believe? Orange peel waste. And that has the ability, the acids in the orange peel waste have the ability to dissolve out the aluminum and the metal oxides, and you can then take that metals and you can separate out the metal ions, which are very valuable, with a solvent, acid. You'll have it in solution, and cobalt citrate, nickel citrate, etc. And then you can precipitate them. And what these students did, they took the separated metals and reassembled the battery. So they went from batteries, waste batteries, dismantled them, did this process, refabricated the batteries. My goodness, I wish I'd had students like that when I was teaching. Incredible. Next. So that was an example. What Ellen found was the example of using acids to dissolve out your desired metals and metal oxides, but using the mildest acids that you could think of, citrus acid and others from citric fruits, and bearing in mind that this the waste from citrus plants in places like Brazil is a problem. What are you going to do with it? To find a use for it, along with recovering the batteries, is a win-win situation. So we were very happy about that. Now, there may well be a downside to this process that we're not aware of, but I can't think of a downside greater than burning the damn things downtown Endicott.